Welcome into the Fatboyz Dynasty podcast as a part of the Fantasy Holics. I'm Brant,
I'm Bo.
and we're going to be covering any and all of your dynasty needs here on this podcast. Today, we're going to cover some winners and losers of the 2022 NFL Draft as they relate to some of the dynasty rankings. Bo, if you want to jump straight in, let's jump straight into your first winner.
Yeah, so obviously there's tons of winners and losers in the NFL draft every year, especially when it comes to dynasty. Obviously, when you look at it from the redraft spectrum, it's not really a win or a lose because you just draft players differently. But if you're already holding certain players, the NFL draft means even more to you than it does to your regular everyday redraft players in fantasy. But I'm going to jump straight into a veteran that I thought won pretty handedly from this draft. And Brant, this one will be no surprise to you because I've been a big supporter of this guy his whole career. He obviously kind of broke my heart a little bit this year, leaving my beloved Falcons. But Matt Ryan is a guy that I take away as a big winner from this draft. He leaves the turmoil of the Falcons rebuild after the Falcons made that gruesome attempt to land Deshaun Watson, and ended up, to where we ended up moving Matt Ryan for a third-round pick, which part of me was really sad to see Matt go, but the other part of me was really happy for Matt because, he's got a chance to rejuvenate his career at the tail end, maybe go out chasing a ring, which he wasn't going to do in Atlanta. But he already stepped into a pretty good receiving core there with the likes of Michael Pittman, obviously the best run game he's ever had in his career with, Jonathan Taylor. And
Absolutely.
then Indy shored up the pass catchers pretty handedly, in my opinion, with Alec Pierce, the wide receiver out of Cincinnati. Big frame there. Matt Ryan does pretty well with big size targets. And then they also drafted Jelani Woods, the tight end out of the University of Virginia, another freak athlete. Guy high points the ball. He makes plays near the red zone. I think Matt Ryan is going to be fantasy relevant and serviceable again. I'm not saying he's somebody that you want to go out and leap for if you're doing a first-year dynasty draft. I wouldn't encourage going out and making him your first quarterback selected. But, if Matt Ryan is sitting out there on waivers in your dynasty league, or, you're in a predicament where maybe Deshaun Watson is your quarterback and you're worried that this year might be the year that he actually gets a suspension, even though I know he didn't play last year, or whatever the case may be, and you're looking for that guy, I think Matt Ryan very well could be that. They also added Bernhard Raymond, that offensive tackle from Central Michigan, who a lot of people thought was going to be a potential first-round talent, maybe late or early to late second round, big physical, nasty guy. And I think, Matt Ryan arguably is going to be playing behind the best offensive line he's had with potentially the best pass catchers he's had, minus, the years of prime Julio. Obviously, no disrespect to prime Julio and Tony Gonzalez, but at least in the last few years that Matt Ryan's had available to him. And I look for Matt Ryan to bounce back pretty big this year.
Absolutely, definitely, yeah. He fell into a great situation. He's definitely a guy that you could target in dynasty startup drafts. You target him late. He's a great bench quarterback. He's going to be definitely serviceable. In most weeks, he definitely will be serviceable QB, especially like you said, the whole Deshaun Watson, or if maybe your quarterback is one of the ones about to get replaced, or maybe you just need somebody to hit you that bridge year until you're drafting one next year in a rookie draft.
Sure.
So,
sure.
One of my biggest winners out of this draft was Daniel Jones. I sticking with the quarterbacks. Daniel Jones. The Giants didn't draft another quarterback to replace him at all. They're putting the belief in Daniel Jones. They also filled the voids on that offensive line to definitely prove that, hey, we're doing what we can to protect you. So I mean, they didn't try to replace any part of that offense. They tried to better that offense. So I think Daniel Jones is a huge winner in this draft.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Daniel Jones is not somebody that I've ever been like super fond of when it comes to fantasy. Obviously he's got the mobility that's interesting. It piques your interest when you come to talk about fantasy and things of that nature. But Daniel Jones has never been somebody who I've been like, yep, that's a guy I want in a dynasty. That's a guy I want in a redraft. Even I've never looked at Daniel Jones under that light. But you're absolutely right. They, for the first time since they drafted Daniel Jones, they did take some shots at that offensive line early and often. You know, Evan Neal, a lot of people thought was potentially the best lineman prospect in this draft, and arguably before the combine and all that, he was the number one offensive lineman on the board.
Yes.
So not only do I agree with you wholeheartedly on Daniel Jones, but I also think this is make or break year for Saquon Barkley. I think Saquon Barkley is obviously a winner too because of the same reasons. You know, that offensive line getting shored up. This should be the best offensive line Saquon Barkley's been behind in his career, and in my opinion, Saquon's got some proving to do as far as the fantasy world is concerned, because you know, Saquon is a guy that a lot of people hold near and dear. They keep him up in those rankings because of what he's done in the past. You know, maybe he's won them championships, or you know, he's been that bell cow for you. But if you really look at his career, I mean, you know, in PPR formats, Saquon Barkley had 2 great years, which is his rookie year, and then he kind of fell off. And he's definitely, for me, at this point, going into his 5th season at age 25, this is where he's got to prove it, because you're nearing the end of that shelf life for average running backs. And if he's not going to be average, which I know a lot of people are going to, you know, be real quick to jump and say, well, Saquon's not average. Well, Saquon's not average. I understand that, but his numbers have started trending the wrong way. And I know there's been injuries and things of that nature, but the line is there. This is the year for Saquon, in my opinion. I would love to be wrong on my Saquon judgment, and I think this year is the year that if Saquon is going to be the guy or a guy, this is the year that he's got to prove it.
Oh, definitely. Adding to that line, it helps, you know, say, hey, we're here. We're trying to keep our quarterback healthy. We want to keep our running back healthy, which we all know injuries have been a huge history for Saquon. Minus, I mean, his rookie year was by far one of his best years that he's had in fantasy wise. I think this is definitely shaping up, and it's weird to ever say this, but this is definitely shaping up as what could be one of the best fantasy seasons for New York Giant players. That's
absolutely.
Kenny Galladay's there as a wideout. You got Saquon Barkley. Daniel Jones has some bye week value right now, and like you talked about his upside or his rushing upside. That's always intriguing in any type of format with when your quarterback takes off running. So if you can draft him late in the draft, he's still young too for dynasty wise. So in startup drafts, drafting him late is could turn to be completely amazing for you, because like I said, his age is still low. So he's got plenty more serviceable years if he can put it with all this that they've added for him.
See, I do want to pump the brakes on you just a little bit there, Brian, if I may. I think maybe with Daniel Jones, because we are both in agreement that this should be the best offensive line he's had. He's got plenty of weapons. You know, he's got Kadarius Toney and Wan'Dale Robinson, the wideout they just drafted out of the University of Kentucky. He's got some weapons in place. And then, of course, if he's got a healthy Saquon Barkley, that should be great for Daniel Jones's value as well, obviously. But I don't necessarily think I want to put any emphasis on drafting him in a startup dynasty, because there is better proven youth and there is more talent at the quarterback position as a whole. More so now than even like 3 or 4 years ago. 3 or 4 years ago, there was plenty of job spots where you're like, oh, is this guy going to be it? Is it going to be this guy? You know, I think if I'm doing a dynasty startup right now, Daniel Jones is probably not on my big board. But if I'm already in an established dynasty and Daniel Jones is on the waiver, he might be somebody that I keep my eye on if I'm up there high at the end of, or top end of the waiver order, or if I've got, you know, if I'm in a fab budget league and I've got that fab budget sitting there and maybe my quarterback plays shaky. If he starts out strong this year and it was like, okay, maybe this is going to be a good year for him, maybe I snag him there. I don't know if I could get on board with drafting him though. That may be where I'm kind of like a little uncomfortable, just because of how up and down that career has been. And by up and down, I mean like quarter to quarter, not game to game, if that makes sense.
I got you. Okay. I definitely understand that. I'm one of those type of people that always waits to draft QBs. And Daniel Jones, if I have to take 2 stabs in the last 2 rounds of a startup, I think Daniel Jones is a definite name that I would be looking to draft at the end of the startup. But I get what you're saying there with that.
All right, Brant, you got a loser? You got a loser for everybody from the draft?
I do. Singletary and Moss, running backs out of Buffalo. They drafted James Cook in the 3rd round, I believe it was. He's going to take over most of the pass catching role there in Buffalo, and honestly, with the way he runs and everything else, I see James Cook could potentially take over that entire backfield with being a 3-down back there in Buffalo. That's one thing Buffalo has been looking. They've been looking for that piece to get them over that hump in the AFC, such as, they've made it to the AFC Championship game back-to-back years, I believe it was. And that running game has been what has stopped them in my mind. And they finally added something a little higher in the draft. I think that James Cook is going to be a 3-down back there in Buffalo. So I think Singletary and Moss, both their values gone this year.
So, at what point do you say, though, as a dynasty enthusiast, as a guy who plays dynasty, looking at rookie picks, at what point do you say, this is becoming a trend? Because if I'm not mistaken, and I very well may be here because I'm not that knowledgeable when it comes to the Buffalo backs since I don't own any of them, but I'm pretty sure it's been 3 years in a row. Devin Singletary was first, then Zach Moss, and now James Cook, if I'm not mistaken. And like I said, I very well may be. But at what point do you say, if we've got all these running backs under rookie contracts, they're all going to get opportunities. At what point do we step back and say, I want to see how this unfolds before I invest in anything? I know that's easier said than done, because when it comes time for your rookie drafts for a dynasty league, you can't let that value slip just because you're worried about the way it's going to look with all these young backs. But to me, initially I was pretty excited about the James Cook role, but we all know Josh Allen is a really good quarterback for fantasy because he does obviously take off so often, and I'm sure that the Bills front office and the coaching staff and fans and everybody collectively doesn't want to see Josh Allen run and take as many hits as he has. So I'm sure that's part of it. But at what point do we say too many backs on one roster, young backs on one roster is enough?
I don't really know if there is a point, because it's like you said, you can't let the value slip. In this class, you have maybe 4 running backs that have, RB1, low RB1, maybe RB2 upside.
Well, let's just break that down for a minute. Let's just talk about the running backs for a split second. I know I'm throwing you a huge curveball here, because initially we were just going to discuss winners and losers of the draft. But what fun would a dynasty podcast be if we didn't throw curveballs occasionally? What are the top 4 or 5 running backs in your mind? I'm not saying you have to necessarily rank them, but out of this rookie class that you think have standalone value potentially, that they're going to come in this year and compete for a potential 3-down workload?
Well, you got your Brees Hall, Pierce there down in Houston. I love Dameon Pierce. I love that they added him, and the only thing standing in his way is Marlon Mack, and
we're not sure Marlon Mack's even standing at this point.
Yeah, that's true. So I absolutely love those 2, and then I love Kenneth Walker. Now, me being a Seahawks fan, and sharing a last name here, so I'm definitely a little homer with Kenneth Walker here. But Penny's made of glass. Every year we see him missing so much time, and we don't even know what the status of Carson is. Kenneth Walker could be literally walking into a 3-down workload by week 2 with the way that Penny always is hurt. And like I said, we don't know what's going on with Carson. Those are 3 of my favorite backs in this draft. I absolutely loved Pierre Strong until he wound up in New England. That's just New England backs disgust me. And then you have, like I said, Cook is really the other one there. So really those are –
See, I'd make a small argument that I potentially could have Tyler Allgeier inside of James Cook in my rankings just because the backfield in Atlanta is so wishy-washy. And Tyler Allgeier, his comp is James Conner. Arthur Smith was kind of the guy that was the offensive coordinator there in Tennessee when Derrick Henry's career got rejuvenated, and he ran for all over the place forever and always. Was the fantasy asset that he was. I just wonder if Tyler Allgeier I would say he's got a really good chance to be at least the first and second down back in Atlanta behind or with Cordell Patterson probably spelling him for third down, especially after the draft when they released Mike Davis. I think Tyler Allgeier is a guy that's in my top 5 running backs. And I think James Cook is there. So I was just curious because I think this year's draft class, especially like you see a guy like Isaiah Spiller fall or get drafted to the Chargers and fall in the depth chart behind Austin Eckler, who we know is a top 5 fantasy running back, at least to start the season. It maybe Isaiah Spiller gets a bigger workload than I think he will, and that a lot of people think he will, and maybe he becomes a top 5 guy and takes a top 5 guy in this class, not overall, and takes more workload away from Eckler than I think he does. But that was one of those backs that a lot of people had as their number 3 on their boards going into the draft, and then his landing spot. For me, it knocked him out of my top 5. But I was just curious to see because it's, not saying that I have extreme high hopes in Devin Singletary or Zach Moss, obviously. If I had to pick one of those two, obviously it'd be Devin Singletary just because there's a better work history. But with that being said, I just don't know how adding that third running back, and I just wanted to get your clarification on your top 4 or 5 rookies, just because I wanted to see, like, with how rich this rookie wide receiver class was, I would have to think that there might be, because of the landing spots and the congestion of some of these backfields that these guys are going into, that maybe more wide receivers are more pertinent in this draft. And maybe, is James Cook a late first round guy? Is he an early second round guy, mid second round guy? I don't know, but that's kind of where I was wanting to see where your running backs were, because I could think of maybe 4 or 5, probably 5 or 6 actually wide receivers that I'd consider taking in front of James Cook. But again, it all depends on your team needs. Yeah, I just wanted to see where you were at with that.
I definitely looking at this draft and then looking at our rookie draft and our dynasty is, well, I'm in the top 2, and my needs are running back, so I'm probably going to go with a running back in the top 2. But after Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker probably is going 1 and 2 in our draft. After that, you could really see 8 to 10 wide receivers go before the next running back comes off the board with where a lot of these landing spots are. So I definitely could see where you're coming from, adding, multiple receivers going in front of any of these other running backs.
I think when it gets a little bit closer into actual draft season and startup draft season and things of that nature, I think you and I will definitely sit down and do a rookie rankings and probably do a rookie mock draft on the podcast. But I think the argument could be made, even though Breece Hall is as good as he is. I don't think if somebody were to take, Drake London potentially 101, I'm not sure that you could really argue with them and tell them they're wrong.
There's definitely not. And the only reason I say Breece Hall is going 1 is because we do know who the 101 needs. We know what his team needs
in our league. Yes.
But yes, definitely, I could definitely see you making an argument for London going 101, Hall going 101, or even just Garrett Wilson.
The only reason that I say wide receivers is because you're starting to see that trend where running back shelf life is kind of shortening even a little bit, and wide receivers is still kind of trending up. And it used to be back in the day that if you took a rookie wide receiver, you had to wait 2 or 3 years to get that production. Well, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, guys like that are kind of expelling that. It's instant. You get instant gratification when you draft these wideouts. And not to say you can't get that from the running backs too, but it just seems like, if I'm sitting there, like, last year in our draft, I was able to get Najee Harris at the 2, and Jamar Chase went 3. Kyle Pitts went 1 in that draft. Obviously, if we could sit down and redo that draft, I'm sure that's not how that would pan out, but that's how it happened last year. And Najee Harris had a formidable year running back wise, but Jamar Chase's rookie year blew Najee Harris is out of the water in fantasy wise. So I think the argument could be made for wide receivers to go just because of where their value's at right now. But I don't want to distract us anymore from what we're doing now. We'll save the rest of that for a later date and later time because I could dive right off the deep end of this stuff. So
I gotcha.
So let's stick with Brees Hall for a minute because one of my losers from this draft obviously was Michael Carter. Michael Carter, after he got drafted by the Jets last year, the hype train left the station at full steam. A lot of people had high expectations. I know a lot of people. There was is it Najee Harris, Etienne, Williams, then Michael Carter, or is it some form of Michael Carter in the top three? Like where does Michael Carter fall? And I think Michael Carter probably underperformed a little bit to people's satisfaction last year that were that high on him. I know you were an owner for him. I didn't own him, so I didn't watch him that closely. But it's my general idea that when you throw him in with those other three names, granted Etienne got hurt, but I think people were a little underwhelmed, but this year was another year of possibility. And looking at this draft, the only running back that the New York Jets could have taken that would have just absolutely dismantled Michael Carter's value in my mind was Brees Hall, the one who ultimately went to the New York Jets. Now, with that being said, I will also say that, Robert Saleh is a former coach from the Kyle Shanahan offense. Multiple backs being featured. I know they tried that in New York last year with Tevin Coleman and Michael Carter and, whatever. But I think you're going to see Brees Hall be not necessarily early a traditional three-down running back, but I think towards the end of the season you may see him get there, but only if Michael Carter doesn't do well with the third down role. And I think if I had to bet, I would think you'd see Michael Carter start out with at least some kind of role, and I expect that to be a third down role. And in Kyle Shanahan's offense, that's still wildly valuable. So I'm not necessarily trying to scare anybody off of Michael Carter or anybody who's got Michael Carter in a dynasty go, oh, well, Bo said on the Fatboyz Dynasty podcast that Michael Carter's value is gone, because that's not what I'm trying to relay here. What I want you to understand is that I think Michael Carter still has value, but it's got to be measured differently now.
Absolutely, and like you put in, like you said, the Kyle Shanahan offense. You never know what running back could be coming out week in, week out. I mean, we've seen multiple running backs have, multiple fantasy value there in San Francisco. And you alluded to this earlier when we were talking about wide receivers on how they could bypass most of the running backs in this year's draft. The era of a workhorse running back is slowly starting to come to an end. You don't see a whole lot of teams only using one running back anymore. I mean, you do still have your Derrick Henrys and I mean, really, that's about it. I mean, I guess Chris McCaffrey too when he's healthy.
Look at your RB1 in fantasy last year being Jonathan Taylor, and a lot of people were really happy if they owned his backup at Nyheim Hines last year.
Yep.
A lot of people got a lot of great production from Nyheim Hines, and that's not even a Kyle Shanahan offense with those running backs. So imagine, I mean, if Brees Hall ends up becoming what people think he is, and Michael Carter's clings on to relevancy somehow and does end up taking over that third down role, look how relevant he could still be. I mean, if you get, I would have to think, again, I'm not a Michael Carter owner. I own no stake in Michael Carter in fantasy, but I would have to think if you're a Michael Carter owner and you get, Nyheim Hines type work from him where you get, on a down week, you get 8 to 10 points and then he has an explosion for 20 or 30. If Michael Carter's your third, fourth, fifth running back, I think you'd be extremely happy with those numbers.
Definitely would be. Yeah, I mean, it's like you said. I mean, if I'm a Michael Carter owner, and odds are I'm going to try to ship him to the Brees Hall owner. But if I don't get what I want, this is another thing that you can sit back and see what you got. Like you said, you get Nyheim Hines. Okay, I'll plug him into my flex, getting 10 to 12 points a week. Or if he's even spilling, especially if he ends up spilling the red zone work over there. I mean, you never know what you're going to get out of him. So definitely a guy to keep an eye on in Michael Carter. And if you are a Michael Carter owner, definitely don't ship him away for cheap, because the value may be there and you may end up kicking yourself 2-3 weeks down the road.
one thing I do want to point out here is that a lot of people talk about Brees Hall, like Brees Hall is he, he's the next greatest thing, and in this draft class, he very well may be. And I know he's got exceptional hands coming out. That's been something that's been relayed. But he only, in his 3 years at Iowa State, he went had 23 receptions in 2019, 23 receptions in 2020, and then last year he had 36. These are not numbers that just pop off the chart and say, okay, this guy can definitely do it. Michael Carter's got that pass catching that he proved he could do at the NFL level last year. So, let's wait and see if Brees Hall becomes a 3-down back before we write Michael Carter off into the sunset. I still think he's going to have some value. Even with saying that, I still think he's a loser of this draft, because anybody else goes there, and we're talking about a more true running back by committee than what we are now, I think.
Absolutely. So I think that about wraps up.
I got one more winner, and I got to talk about my favorite wide receiver in this class. Even though I'm a diehard Falcons fan, and I'm slowly keening to the idea of having Drake London. Christian Watson was one of my favorite wide receiver prospects coming into this, and I think he's a huge winner because not only did he fall into a great scheme, but he's falling into a great scheme that's going to have a lot of wide open targets. Going to Green Bay, he's got Aaron Rodgers, who I would have to assume, even though he did just get the bag this offseason, is going to be playing with a chip on his shoulder. His best weapon, one of his best weapons of his career, and Devontae Adams gets traded this offseason. Kind of started that domino effect on all these big trades we saw when he went to the Vegas, and now Christian Watson's coming in, and Christian Watson is a guy that I think maybe not super early on, because I know his route tree isn't super polished. But this is a guy who's 6'4", 208 pounds with 32.5-inch arms, 10 1/8 inch hands, and he ran a 40-yard time at a 4.36. So you're talking about a guy who's got some speed and size here. I think Christian Watson could end up becoming a matchup nightmare in the future. And if I had to put money on a guy that's going to break out and be that guy, because if you remember right, when Justin Jefferson came out and was that guy, Justin Jefferson was not the number one wide receiver on very many people's board that year. He was kind of a guy that was kind of an afterthought. I think Christian Watson's going to be at the tail end of these good wide receivers that you see get taken in rookie drafts of Dynasty. And if you're sitting at the 108, 109, and you don't have a real need, you're going BPA, and you've seen, Drake London come off the board. You've seen Brees Hall, Kenneth Walker, Garrett Wilson, Jameson Williams, Chris Olave all come off the board, and you're sitting there going, well, who's the guy? Well, for me, that's where Christian Watson is an absolute value of a player if you can get him there, because I do think he's a guy that you could see be a top 20 wide receiver in Dynasty PPR rankings year one, especially based on his landing spot.
Definitely just a guy that has to earn Aaron Rodgers' trust. That's about all he's got to do there in Green Bay.
And that's not an easy thing to do, as we've seen in the past.
Well, that is true. Well, that sums it up for our winners and losers. As always, we're hoping we'll be putting out every Tuesday evening, posting Dynasty podcast. Make sure you guys check out Seth Berger. He's also on the Fantasy Holics page. Make sure you check him out for any of your IDP needs.
And there's going to be more podcasting groups to follow. So if you're sitting there, wanting to get into, redrafts or super flexes or things of that nature, there's going to be more podcasts to follow. We hope you tune into us if you're looking for Dynasty needs. Again, if you've got any questions specific to Dynasty that you want to hear us talk about on the show, we definitely enjoy talking about that. But if you have any IDP needs, jump over, go listen to Seth's podcast, chat Seth up, give that a listen. And if you've got anything else that you want to see talked about, like I said, redraft or superflex or things of that nature, I think they're coming in the near weeks or months. So keep listening for that too.
Absolutely. And good luck in all your in your season this year. And we will see you and talk to you next Tuesday.